Okay, this is Roger Martin from Billings, Montana. This is Cheryl Atkinson reporting on this and the vaccine debate. I didn't know that they were hiding. I knew they were hiding stuff. I didn't know how early. I think this stuff has been going on. My earliest reports are in the 50s and 60s. So there's no doubt by the 80s that there were people that knew that this stuff was going on full bore.
These pharmaceutical companies, if they damage your child, the vaccine companies don't pay. It's an absolute outrage. And boy, does my heart go out to that father with that son, because in that clip, we see that vibrant little boy, that little toddler running around, healthy as can be. And as a teenager, my God, the nightmare for that young man and for that family to live with a severely, profoundly autism-affected son. It's just an outrage, folks, isn't it?
Well, Sean, it actually, it goes back farther than the Full Measure interview. You've mentioned the 1980s, but the powers that be have known that there's been a problem since at least the early 2000s. There was the clandestine Simpsonwood meeting in Norcross, Georgia. If I'm not mistaken, that was in the year 2000, and there were industry representatives and agency representatives there, and they knew that there was a problem, but in different series of iterations of the Verstraeten study, the signal where there was a problem with the interplay between vaccine components and neurological disorders was downplayed until the signal was weakened in study after study. So that data was manipulated. And in the Full Measure show that you just were referencing, the transcript on the internet dated Sunday, January 6th, goes on to say that Dr. Zimmerman has provided remarkable new information. He claims that during the vaccine hearings all those years ago, he privately told government lawyers that vaccines can and did cause autism in some children. That turnabout from the government's own chief medical expert stood to change everything about the vaccine autism debate if the public were to find out. And the Full Measure transcript goes on to say, quoting Dr. Zimmerman, referencing Dr. Zimmerman, on June 15, 2007, he took aside the Department of Justice or DOJ lawyers he worked for defending vaccines in vaccine court. He told them that he discovered, quote, exceptions in which vaccinations could cause autism, end quote. Quote, I explained that in a subset of children, vaccine-induced fever and immune stimulation did cause regressive brain disease with features of autism spectrum disorder, end quote. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Is referenced in the Full Measure interview, and it says, this panicked the two DOJ attorneys, and they immediately fired Zimmerman. That was on a Friday, and over the weekend they called Zimmerman and said his services would no longer be needed. They wanted to silence him. And finally, what I'll share with you is that it says, days after the Department of Justice lawyers fired Dr. Zimmerman as their expert witness, he alleges, they went on to misrepresent his opinion to continue to debunk autism claims. Records show that on June 18, 2007, a DOJ attorney, Dr. Zimmerman spoke to, told Vaccine Court, quote, we know, referring to Dr. Zimmerman's views on the issue. There is no scientific basis for a connection, end quote, between vaccines and autism. Dr. Zimmerman now calls that, quote, highly misleading. So, Sean, his opinion was misrepresented, and thousands of children's claims were dismissed. They were dismissed. There was a project and an article subsequently published in Pace Environmental Law Journal, a peer-reviewed journal, where families whose children were awarded damages, and it's not a non-contentious process as people may be led to believe, but children who were awarded damages, say for something like encephalopathy, their families reported that they just so happened to also have autism. So there is a connection between awards having been paid out for vaccine injury and individuals who have autism. Mm-hmm. It's just not that that's what the diagnosis is that they were given the award for. Ed?
Right. I just interviewed Dr. B, a pathologist, who is coming public about her great awakening. She used to be an atheist, now she's a Christian. She was faced with having to deal with buckets of aborted baby parts. She had no idea that that was part of the deal when she was in residency to become a pathologist. But now she realizes that that's part of the deal, and it rocked her soul. I am here to tell you folks, my personal belief is that these vaccines are part of a eugenics program, and if they can't get you to abort your baby, they're going to hurt your kid if they can. And my heart goes out again to that father in that piece, that Cheryl Atkinson piece, with that teenage young man now with complete full-blown pandas, complete off-the-chart, the worst autism you can have. That is a life sentence for a parent because that child will never, ever be able to live on his own and support himself. Look, what Dr. B told me in this interview is that she believes that these evil people, pharmaceutical companies and beyond, the global New World Order plan is to destroy families. And what better way to do it if they can't get you to abort your child than to destroy your child's brain? Rant over.
So I have three things to say to you, if I may. First of all, getting back to what Ed was saying about thimerosal being used allegedly as a preservative. Actually, what I'd heard years ago is that it was used so vaccines didn't need to be made in the cleanest conditions. But decades and decades and decades ago, the late Dr. Frank Engley authored a study, and it showed that mercury wasn't even sufficient, wasn't reliably sufficient as a bactericide on streptococci. So that's one thing. Number two, you were talking about the DNA and the aborted fetal tissue cell lines. Teresa Deischer, if people would like to look up Teresa Deischer, she also has done work on the deleterious nature of this in regard to autism. Finally, you're talking about how profoundly affected some of the individuals with autism are. And a lot of times people like to say, oh, there's not a real epidemic. It's always been this way. It's diagnostic substitution, demographic shift. But back in a previous decade, the UC Davis Mind Institute studied this, and they showed that it was not due to diagnostic substitution or demographic shift. California was the state with the best statistics, and they charted full syndrome autism. These are not what some say quirky. These are not individuals with quirks. Full syndrome autism has symptoms like being nonverbal, right, like teenage.
All right, we're going to leave it here, and you can see the full thing, about 50 minutes long. The fact is, we're getting into more and more proof that this stuff actually started in the middle 50s to early 60s. Now with cancer causing shots, polio and other things, but we're getting into autism, dramatic increases in autism in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s and beyond, dramatic increases. And we're getting individual studies showing that people that refuse shots, groups that refuse shots, had a dramatic amount of less problems in the immune area, in ear infections, in allergies, in asthmas, in rashes, and in behavioral problems. like autism, significantly less. And so these things are all connected, and it's part of a genocide that they're creating to destroy human beings through medical means. And specifically, if you can't abort the fetus, like this guy said, and kill the infants, then you destroy their mental and emotional states and ability to normally cope with social issues. And this is what autism is. And they've known about this for at least, like I said, 60s and 70s, at least. And it's taken, the horror is it's taken 4 to 5 decades to get some of this information out after the damage has been done. Think about that. Think about that. This is the ugly truth. And it's worse than we know. I'll give you a link of an individual that tells you what you can do with some of this stuff, but the fact is, it is vicious and ugly. Autism1.org, I'm going to have to look this up. This is part of the clip on that site.
Autism recovery is never easy, but with proper medical intervention, what I wanted most for my son actually happened. Ryan is happy and has friends. I want that for your child, too. It's about living on Autism Island. It's about how difficult it is to be in the A Club. It's mostly about hope.
The subtitle being "Winning a War on Autism." It was a war. It was a battle that we were fighting for a lot of years.
For me, I think people need to address the root cause of it and not address the symptoms of it. I mean, as an engineer, if we're trying to solve a problem with an airplane, we need to be able to show, this is the root cause of the problem, not this is the symptoms of these problems.